Chapter Festival, where business meets wisdom. Today I have with me Dr. Kiran Karnik, who is a columnist and a former president of NASSCOM, and also the author of today's book, Decisive Decade, India 2030, Hippo or Gazelle. Did I say that right? Gazelle or Hippo, my bad. First, my first question to you is, could you tell us, in your own words, what is this book about?
This book takes a look at what India would be like in 2030. I started writing it at the beginning of the decade, so I was looking at 10 years, but I finished it at end of 2021, so around 2030. It really looks at what India would be like in 9 main areas, which I think would influence where we are then. And then the last few pages take a look at India at 2047 or 2050, 100 years of republic. So it covers 8 or 9 major areas which are very important in our day-to-day life, but it will shape, as I see it, the country in 2030.
So you say you started writing this in 2020 to look at the whole decade. Now, 3 years in, how did your book evolve during that time? Were there any things that you had to go back and change? Were there any things where you felt like, you were right on the mark?
No, I had to change 2 or 3 things drastically, thanks to COVID. I started pre-COVID, and it was truly a black swan event, and nobody anticipated this scale and thing. Epidemics come and go, especially in India, unfortunately, but true. But this one was something altogether different. And I had to redo not just the chapter on health, but also the ones on the economy, for example, on jobs, on education, because education transformed drastically in these 2 years of COVID. So a lot of rewriting was required, which is what delayed it partly.
Now I need to come to this because you mentioned the gazelle and the hippo. Can you tell me, what do these animals represent?
I was looking for an analogy and looked at the animal world. One of the things I used commonly by very widely in India is the elephant analogy. Very large, very big, but slow and lumbering. I thought that's not quite it. We aim to be like a gazelle in my mind, but before that I thought we could become a hippo, which is something which is big, large, slow, not quite right. When I see a hippo, I tend to run away. When you see a gazelle, you want to go and pet it like a dog. And I think that's the difference, that either we can become a large country which is aggressive, sometimes like our neighbor to the north, or we can become a gazelle which is sleek, fast, agile, and yet lovable. It's something which people like. They like to go there and make friends with it, and the gazelle is seen as a friendly animal.
It's interesting. I also felt that you chose animals that people didn't have too many preconceptions about already. That's something you actually have to look up and be like, okay, what does this animal tell me? Like you said, elephant is something we already think about quite deeply, as perhaps it's a cultural thing. But if you're using that analogy, what is India looking like right now?
Well, it's difficult, because frankly, when I look in the country, I sometimes think we're taking on a hippo persona, and it doesn't please me. And yet when I go abroad or talk to people from outside the country, we are yet seen as a gazelle. And that, excites me a great deal. And by the way, my book is a very optimistic one. I painted some dystopian scenarios of what could happen, but my whole outlook, and personally I'm a great optimist. So I've taken a very optimistic outlook. So I'm hoping that the gazelle which we appear to outsiders is what we become to our own people in the country.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I thought you do have a really good perspective on kind of the macro level things, and it's very, like you said, it is optimistic, but it's also it doesn't have any judgment in it. It's very interesting to read that. It's kind of like it helps get back past all the cloudiness, all the different opinions that we hear about every single day. What kind of, how do you get that kind of thinking? What kind of critical questions do you ask yourself when you are confronted with different opinions?
Well, I think, no great secret. I mean, anybody can do it, and I don't think I do it particularly well. But to me, the secret is to try and be objective, to step out of your normal biases. All of us have our biases. I have deep biases and prejudices, I know that. But to be conscious of them helps you to not get rid of them, but to try and look at things from somebody else's point of view. And the other one, which is to me very important, is listening to others. It's something we all tend to lose out on. I'm sure I've lost a great deal of it. You tend to lecture, to talk, and to pontificate. When you learn to listen to others, you get differing points of view. Something completely contrary to yours, something that you may think is nonsense, but yet you listen, and that gives you a sense of perspective. And then the important thing, which may be originating from my training in science, is to try and look at evidence, data, hard facts. And those don't lie. You can look at truth in different ways, it's true. But there are facts, there is data, there are figures, and those are what you should go by, and not what somebody tells you, opinions, views. Those are good to listen to, but you've got to separate and sift one from the other, and that gives you the perspective.
And your book it's very policy heavy, of course. You mentioned a lot of different policies that you like to see in place. But can you tell me a little bit about the process of going through this when you're writing these policies? How do you begin this process of writing?
Well, much of my life and career have been at, you might say 40,000 feet, which is not the best thing to do. I had the good fortune early on of getting what we used to then call cow dung on your feet. So I have some understanding of the grassroots, but much of my work itself has been at that level. And therefore, I tend to look at things now, especially because I can no longer go out in the field and get first-hand reports from, say, deep rural India. So I tend to look at things from the point of view of what are the policies that will change this. The other thing I've learned and seen over the years is that, if you can shift the policy needle even a little bit, the kind of difference it makes in a country like India is phenomenal. And that's been my excitement when I worked. Very often people ask me, you worked in the government, and then many, many years later you had worked with the government despite all the frustrations that we all hear about government committees and reports going into dustbins or into book stacks somewhere. And yet, because if you have even a 1% success in that, I think it makes a huge difference to millions and millions of people and shapes things. So that policy perspective is something that excites me.
Absolutely, and the key is always in the implementation. Why do you think we have so many challenges when it comes to implementing even really good policies?
This depends, because I was just talking and we were discussing just this point, and our whole system, starting from political leadership down to administration, down to the district and Gram Panchayat level, is fantastic when we are faced with a crisis. Nobody, I would argue this very strongly, no country faces crisis as well as we do. I mean, look at COVID. We went up and down, we messed up a bit, without a doubt somewhere in between. But look at the whole vaccination story. I mean, which country can claim that kind of success? Look at the kind of things we've done on COVID, the app that tells you that. Look at what we did back in 1971 when we had 10 million refugees flowing across our border. We handled it all. And which country at that state of development could have done that? So when we want, we're able to implement. But unfortunately, our crisis systems are very good. Our routine systems are slow, high inertia, and sometimes prone to corruption. And that creates a lot of problems.
Absolutely. This is going to be a little bit difficult question too, but for someone who's reading your book, if there's only one thing they can take away from it, what would you want that to be?
Well, the one thing which, in the context of all that's happening in the world and what we aspire to be, my last line, or penultimate line in the book says that I hope we are a rich and prosperous country. I hope we are a superpower. But that's not my ultimate hope. My ultimate hope is that we are a happy nation. I think happiness is what we should aim at. And certainly if happiness comes from being a rich country, that's good. If happiness comes from being powerful, maybe. But those don't excite me. A lot of people think that 2050 India should be a superpower. And that's nice, but that's not exciting. To me, if we can say India can be the happiest country in the world, that's something. Happiness means reasonable amount of prosperity, comfort, health, education, everything that you aspire for, whatever you want to do as a person, as an individual.
And then, I must ask, because you are a self-proclaimed public unintellectual, what does that term mean? Because I don't think anyone here can call you an unintellectual.
No, I'm truly, I mean it genuinely. It's not one of those, false modesty. I am interested in public policy, as we just discussed, therefore the public part of it, public issues, public policy. But unintellectual because I have no aspirations or pretensions of being a researcher. If I write a book with a lot of references people have said, it just shows that I've had to work hard to get those figures. But I'm not an academic. I'm not a deep researcher in any one given area. I'm not an expert in one area. And therefore, truly, I think of myself as an unintellectual, but a very interested one in public policy and with views on everything.
I think that in itself is very inspiring. Do you have any advice for people who are aspiring writers?
The thing I always tell people is two things. To young people, do what excites you, because if you do what you're passionate and excited about, you'll do well. And today, if you do well in any field, doesn't matter what it is, you'll get fame, name, money if you want, whatever. The second is, hold an optimistic viewpoint. Sometimes we get cynical, old people particularly, but even younger people saying, this is wrong, that is wrong. So quit complaining. Finding what's wrong is fair, but don't complain and don't be cynical. Look at the future with optimism and see what you can do about it as an individual.
That's a really great message. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today and for joining us at the Indian Business Festival. And I hope to hear more. Do you have any other books in work, anything we can be looking forward to?
Well, I wouldn't like to talk about it yet because it's a work and thought in process.
In process.
But thank you.